I cannot hear the proceedings.
Showing that the room has been, the mic has been put on mute.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear now. Thank you.
And I can hear you as well.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the October 19th meeting of the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Board. Before we get going, I'd like to have everybody, all the board members, please introduce themselves. Jamie, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Jamie Dragon. I represent Moyle County.
Neil Hogan from Bennington County.
Michael Bancroft, Orange County. Burnham, Windsor County.
Brad Ferland, Chair, Caledonia County.
Allison Frazier, Chittenden County.
Bob Patterson, Addison County.
Michael Colson from Essex County. Jay Sweeney, Franklin County.
And online, we have a couple members as well.
David Dean from Windham County.
And David Robillard from Orleans County.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Commissioner.
Commissioner Herrick, the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'll have staff go ahead and start now, and then we'll just go this way.
Allie Thomas, the Director of Outreach.
Josh Morse, Public Information Officer.
Catherine Guessing, Legal Officer.
Chris Saunders, Project Coordinator.
Don Fowler, Lieutenant of the Warden Service.
David Sausel, Program Manager. Mark Scott, Director of Wildlife.
Okay, thank you. Anybody online with the departments?
Yes.
Hi, Kim Royer, retired fur bear biologist.
Okay, thank you. So we will move to the agenda. The first item on the agenda tonight is public comment period. There's at least one gentleman here. Would you like to make public comments?
No, thank you.
Okay,
Just going to listen.
great. Is there anybody online that would like to make a public comment? Okay, seeing nobody. Thank you. Moving on, and first item on our agenda will be the approval of the previous meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to read those? And if so, can I get someone to make a motion?
So
Or
moved.
Then I have a second. Okay, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda is an update from the department on our trapping best management plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the commissioner and let you take,
Sure. Mark, you want to take it? Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. You noticed the sole topic on your agenda, but there's been an incredible amount of work on this, and Kim Royer has chaired this effort throughout, but an awful lot of staff has been involved. I got the privilege of being able to attend every meeting and then to communicate with staff throughout this entire process. The commissioner was able to attend a meeting for one of them through the whole duration. To do that, Lieutenant Sean Fowler was there at the meetings, all of them or not. We had 4 different meetings, and Kim's going to go through this. And also 2 other field wardens, was it Warden Randy Hazard and Mike Scott? Okay, Chris Saunders was at all the meetings there, and David Swasville was able to make the last 2. And our attorney, Catherine Guessing, made most of the meetings. I mentioned that with you, Chair, hoping that any of these people I mentioned can comment and help to have the board understand what we've done to date, where we are and where we're going to do that. So if that's okay with you, they're going to chime in at different times.
Hello.
Kim's going to through that process to do it. Do I need to pause?
I'm not sure whether there. Is somebody trying to say something online? David?
The sound just faded out completely.
It sounds good from my end.
Yes, I can hear it now, but it just faded out.
Interesting. Okay. Probably heard the beginning of me too, but
The only thing I was gonna do.
Yeah.
Before you do finish, can you just, for especially the newer members,
sure.
just give us just a brief overview of how we got to this point?
Sure. Maybe I would turn that over to the commissioner. I think that's more appropriate. Is the commissioner is our key legislative person who works with the legislature over there. And it's complicated, so I don't think anyone could do justice in a few minutes how we got to this point. That's almost a loaded question, because what's happening is I'm hearing from some people that are even upset that we're going down this road to do it. They don't understand the full interactions that the commissioner had. I'd hate to say the number of hours or days working with the legislature over there, but Commissioner, do you want to comment briefly on that? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I live on the spot. I think the easiest way to sum this up is the legislature took up a bill that initially proposed to ban the use of traps, and we had a counter proposal to, among other things, raise the bar, if you will, on trapping to the best management practices, which encounters different types of traps. And I'll let Kim address what BNP actually stands for if people have questions. And essentially that's what we landed on. And they gave us a period of time that we have to come up with rules to address that, to raise the bar, if you will. And so that became a directive to the Fish and Wildlife Board. As you recall, the department brings recommendations to the Fish and Wildlife Board based on research and science. And I felt the best way to gather that information was to put together a working group. And there were this room, how many folks did we have in here? 15? Probably. We had folks representing the Trappers Association. We had law enforcement because of their expertise. We had the Humane Society. We had POW and a number of other folks. And it was a facilitated meeting, trying to come up with common ground based on what the legislation was directing us to do. So that's the purpose of that working group. They met 3 times. And so then today is the report, which will begin to serve as their report and recommendation to the Fish and Wildlife Board.
Well, the board, for the new members, also received a petition from the Vermont Trappers Association. And there was a petition that the board tabled, I believe, maybe back in 2019, that dealt with setbacks from Protect Our Wildlife, maybe Humane Society. I can't recall exactly, I don't have it in front of me. So those are 2 actions that the board had in front of it to do. So representing the board, the chair, you had asked, you selected Mike Paulson and Marty Van Buren to represent the board. We had a couple backup people, Jamie and David Dean, if they couldn't make it to the meetings. So part of the whole process and going to legislature will be the report was these working group met 4 different times. Kim's going to go through all the details. So the point of tonight's meeting is not to rush through this, to give you the time you need to process this, digest it, and try to understand what went on at all the 4 meetings that we had. We are not at a stage to get into specific recommendations to the commissioner yet. That's my responsibility, and the team as the wildlife director, to get the final recommendations to the commissioner from the working group and our staff based on what we heard. To be honest with you, there was consensus and complete agreement on some activities being proposed. There was others that I don't think, no matter how much time we would get, we would ever come to a consensus. We're quite a ways apart. We're going to talk about those. So there's going to be some work that the commissioner's got to do based on our recommendations and all the information. So we just want to try to disclose everything to you that we had. Mike, you were able to attend 3 of the 4 meetings there. Marty, I too bad he can't be here tonight, but please too comment at any time. I thought what might be more productive for you, Mike, since you were there, is we broke this down in different segments, and different staff are gonna spearhead that just like they did on the working groups. And when we're done with that, it might be good to hear from you, Mike, to add your flavor as representing the board. There's other things that the commissioner may have to consider that the working group didn't get into on its final report to legislature, that the committee didn't wrestle with. But this working group is primarily set up to try to come up with consensus on making recommendations that makes trapping more humane and more safe in the state of Vermont. So no other state's ever done this. So so I guess I'll just say we can take all kinds of questions throughout. The whole purpose of us being here tonight is for you. We want to make sure you understand what we did. If there's any nuances and any information that we have, where did the information come from? I think there's going to be one key assignment that Kim's going to signal strongly to you, and we all really plead you to do, is to take the time at some point and look at the presentation from AFWA, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. I think Kim's going to talk about this, but I'll probably get it wrong, but at least 30-year study, millions and millions of dollars, lots and lots of participants. They kind of wrote the book on a peer-reviewed professional publication from wildlife professionals throughout North America and beyond on the best management practice work that they did for trapping. To date, it's been a voluntary recommendation to all the agencies on trapping to do that. We're at a point now, though, that we're going to probably be the first state to recommend taking some of those and putting them into regulations. What those are, we still got some more work to be thinking through some of those. So that's our purpose of tonight. So it's for you folks here.
So just to take, so then you as director will eventually make recommendations. Commissioner will bring those to us as a board.
Correct.
And we as a board will choose to accept those, but eventually we turn that into a rule.
Yes, just what Catherine talked about.
Exactly.
More public process, more involvement, a chance for the LCAR that you heard about to make sure that we're following legislative intent and authority, that the board does that in the regulations. The first step, as you know, goes to this interagency on rules that Catherine talked to you about, to make sure that we're communicating with other agencies that might be affected about this rule. So that's exactly right. That's the whole purpose of this. We're going to talk, I don't want to steal Kim's thunder anywhere else. We've had a lot of discussions on when would you expect to see that. I also got to put in that it was mandated by the act that we hold a public hearing on this topic. And I don't know for sure if we nailed down the date.
Probably the 29th.
Okay, that's what we're shooting for. We didn't want to get it during the deer hunting seasons, but between when the November season ends and the muzzleloader starts, but to have that probably in the Bethel Worlds in it. Chris is trying to work on some details that we do that. Our staff will manage that public hearing with the whole purpose that everybody comes that night, gets an opportunity to share their input with us. You will get all the information that's recorded that night, just like we do with all of our other rules and regulations before you. So,
Do you have any dates that we need to make other than that public hearing? We have to have this rule.
Yeah. Well, the commissioner knows that we have until another year, right, Commissioner, to get these changed. So we have a lot of time, basically, but we didn't want to dilly-dally. We got on this right away. That's January 15th, I believe. So we have some internal work. We're on the fast track. We got to have the hearing in that. And we're going to look at that hearing to see if there's other information that perhaps this working group overlooked on the recommendations of the commissioner. But we'll share everything to us on the commissioner. So that's an important thing. Then beyond that is we've got the whole calendar year to try to get amendment to a fur bearer rule to incorporate, to make trapping more humane and safe in the state of Vermont. Does this work for everyone here to go through this tonight? Tim, did I misspeak on anything? Please correct me.
Nope.
Turn it over to you.
Good summary, Mark.
Well, I don't know about that, but I asked her to really take her time because this is really, we don't need to hear it. Well, you got to hear it and just process and be with us because you're going to be working on this in more detail, probably January, February or so, if things go to plan. But who knows, right? Okay, thanks, Kim. I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and that's all right with everybody. But I did want to acknowledge that I've got some other staff here that were participants, if they could speak up at times to help. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you, Mark. So this presentation could be relatively dry, and I'm hoping that we can have a conversation rather than me and others in the department just presenting the slides. So again, Mike, I jump in anytime. Anybody else in on the department staff who participated, I would hope would jump in at any point in time if I forget something or if there's something that we need to add. I'm going to try to share my screen. Let me just see if this works. And okay. So can you folks see this?
Yes.
Okay, and is it coming through as a slideshow, or can you see the slides on the side?
You can see the slides. Go to slideshow and from
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah, I'll put it. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to have some difficulty seeing the board members or staff members. So Mark or somebody else, if somebody has a question or a comment, just let me know. Okay.
Brad, if you're on that too, go ahead with your board members. That'd be great. So thanks.
Yeah. All right. So as Mark suggested, this is an effort to go through the 4 working group meetings that we have had since August 8th, I believe, or August 3rd. And I'm going to try to walk through this as carefully as I can and as close to what I recall and what our minutes have said, and try to give you the information that you need in order to understand what we've done for the last 2.5 months. So we had a working group goal. This was actually sent out in the invitation to all the participants, and the goal was to attempt to recommend rules to the commissioner that would regulate the use of foothold trapping systems in accordance with the best management practices criteria as outlined in the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And as Mark had suggested, this has been published now in the prestigious Wildlife Monograph. And just to give you a sense of, this is a 22-year effort at this point. They tested or researched the performance for 84 models of restraining traps, 6 cage traps, 68 foothold traps, and 9 foot encapsulating traps, and 1 power activated foot snare on 19 different fur-bearing species, or 231 trap species combinations. And then the animals that were caught were sent to veterinarians for post-mortem examinations. They conducted post-mortem examinations on 8,566 fur bearers that were captured by trappers that were accompanied by field observers. And of the 231 trap model species combinations tested, they actually had sufficient data to evaluate the 173 combinations, of which about 59% met the criteria for best management practices. So a very in-depth, extensive research effort. So let me just go on here. So the working group participants, and Mark and the commissioner both went through many of these folks, but we had Joanne Barbeau from HSUS, Chris Bradley from the Sportsman's Federation, and Scott Chapman came as an alternate on the first day. Tom Decker was a representative from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, Brenna Goldenzi from Protect Our Wildlife, Rob Mullen from the Vermont Wildlife Coalition. Dave Kelly did come as an alternate on one day. Michael Colson from the board, Kevin Lawrence from the Vermont Trappers Association, Bruce Martin from the Vermont Trappers Association, Representative Amy Sheldon, Martin Van Buren, also from the board, Senator Chris Bray, who actually came to 3 of our 4 meetings, Warden Sean Fowler, Warden Michael Scott, and Warden Randy Hazard came to 1 meeting as an alternate. And Mark mentioned the department staff that also attended, but I want to just particularly thank Chris Saunders and Josh Morse. Josh took the minutes at these meetings, as did Chris, and they did an incredible job of really documenting almost everything that was said verbatim. We also recorded the meeting so we could double check and make sure that they were correctly done. But it was just amazing how close to the conversation those minutes were. And Chris arranged a lot of the meeting, the room setup and organizing things. And so it was really, really helpful to have them as support. So thank you to both of you for that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned Josh. Josh, my apologies. I left you off the list. In my many years of doing meetings in different capacities, taking minutes and seeing the results, I have never seen a finer set and more detailed minutes than Josh took at that meetings. So I left out probably the person who did the most important work. And that's my observation, but I can tell you, I see Mike Polson nod his head. That was the members too. And I know that involved a lot of time you going back and listen to the tape. You tape the meeting. So impressive work. Anybody wants to see and hear all that detail, Josh can provide it to you. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, really amazing. So thanks to both of you. So the objectives of the working group, what we were hoping to do was to get informed consent or at least consensus from the participants on both the process that we had set up, which we really wanted to be fair and transparent, and the outcomes that came out of each one of the meetings. You know, like I said, we wanted the process to be equitable, fair, and respectful, as well as transparent. We were hoping to secure agreement on those final recommendations that would go to the commissioner. I think, as Mark suggested, there's some areas of consensus or alignment, and some areas not, that there wasn't any. And then we were hoping to ensure that those recommendations were clear, applicable to what we were trying to accomplish, practical and enforceable. So we scheduled the first meeting on August 4th, excuse my phone. And we had started with ground rules, and we went through these ground rules with the group. And let me just see if I can. And hang on a second. We went through the ground rules with the group, and people all agreed that they would follow these ground rules. We did have one member add the last one, which was to begin from a place of forgiveness, given some of the history between some of the members of the working group. And we revisited these ground rules almost at every meeting. And then we also talked about our interest in trying to find some consensus. And I think the idea that we had was, originally we were hoping not to have to take votes. We ultimately did start to take some votes on certain issues, but what we really were hoping to do was to find consensus, and the definition of consensus that we used was, rather than inferring a unanimous or enthusiastic endorsement, consensus meant that all the members of the working group could fully support, agree to, or even reluctantly accept an individual recommendation. So after we went through consensus and we went through the ground rules, we actually turned it over, as Mark suggested, to Bryant White, who is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Policy Program Manager and has been the Best Management Practices Research Coordinator for 20 years plus. and also Dr. Dan Grove, who was one of the wildlife veterinarians that was doing the necropsies on some of the species, some of the animals that were being caught through the research effort. And they presented an overview of the 22-year BMP research effort. And as Mark said, we'll send you a link in a separate email, but would suggest that anybody with questions about the history of this or the results of it, take a look at that presentation. It was very excellently done. So one of the other things, and I think, Sean, maybe if you feel comfortable, do you want to just talk a little bit about the legislative charges and how we narrowed some of those things down?
Sure. So as you can see up on the screen there, this is all taken out of Act 159 for, the charges that were set forth with the working group. There's a lot there, and there was a pretty diverse group of passionate folks in the room. So when we first started, there was a lot of looking around the room with not a lot of talking. And then there was also a lot of jumping around to a whole bunch of different subjects. So the original thought from members of the department was to break the entire working group up into two smaller working groups to try to facilitate, better dialogue was the thought process there. And we also had, Kim, was it 2 petitions and a letter for the board?
Right, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
we had two petitions, like you said, and then one that was a list of desired outcomes.
And the thought process being was whatever comes out of this working group and comes out of legislature is eventually going to come back to all of you in the Fish and Wildlife Board. So if there was petitions in front of the board, it made some amount of sense to try to address that through the working group and bring it back. So with all that being said, when we were in one of the smaller working groups, I made a suggestion that we go through those 3 documents that I just talked about, the 2 board petitions and the letter was actually a board petition from 2019, and go through all of those things as a place to start and just see if the points within those petitions and letter fell within what the legislative act was looking for. So that's where we started. And the smaller group that I was in, it worked really, really well because we just went through each one of those things line by line, went around the room and said, does this fall within the legislative mandate? Yes or no? There was a little bit of debate about a few things with some clarifications here and there, but it was a really good way, I thought, to get the conversation started, to the point when we came back to the second meeting, which I won't get too far ahead, we kind of implemented that with everybody. Is that a fair assessment, Kim?
Yeah, and so actually, Sean, you can go ahead, and this is the next slide.
Okay. Yeah, so based on all of the things that came out of those original discussions about the board petitions and the letter, the working group narrowed all of that information down to what you can see on the screen. So the VTA petition that was in, because that had a lot of direct BMP crossover, which you'll see as far as, the methods and trap setup and that kind of thing. Then there was much discussion about trail setbacks, discussion of baits and lures, other trapping techniques, specifically around body gripping traps, and then the discussion of, ethical, humane dispatch. So out of all of those first 3 letters and the entire legislative mandate, the working group kind of boiled everything down to these points as what we were going to discuss moving forward. Good, Kim?
Great. That's it. Great. Thank you, Sean. So that set up the stage for the second working group, which was August 23rd. And there were a lot of questions around what was a trail and what are the current policies and regulations around trails in the state of Vermont. So Catherine then went ahead and actually did a whole presentation on trail definitions. And this has been probably one of the more challenging discussions that the working group dealt with. So I think it would be helpful to the board to understand what some of those definitions and regulations are. So Catherine agreed to go ahead and give that presentation right now to the members of the board. And Catherine, I'm not sure whether you want me to go ahead and forward the slides for you. Might be the easiest.
Sure. Thank you, Kim. You can forward.
Okay.
So part of the act basically directed us to recommend requirements for the location of traps, including placement for purposes other than nuisance trapping at a safe distance from areas of public recreation or public locations, including public trails, class 4 roads, playgrounds, parks, etc. Where places where people are reasonably expected to recreate. Forward, please. One of the things, sort of background, I did want to talk a little bit to the group at the time about some of the legal background associated with trapping. One of the things that is already in statute is that every trapper must seek permission to set a trap on the land of another person. They have to notify the owner of a property of the intention to trap, and they have to designate the location of the trap. Forward, please. This applies to all private lands. Landowners can revoke their permission at any time, and it also applies to municipal lands, although we often think of municipal lands as being public lands. Municipalities do have the authority to prohibit trapping on their lands. Forward, please. While municipalities cannot regulate hunting, trapping, or fishing, they do have the authority to control activities on their own land. So they couldn't pass a law that said, you know, within the town of XYZ, you cannot trap. But they can say, on this piece of property that we own, our town forest, we don't want trapping. And that principle has been affirmed by the Vermont Supreme Court. Forward, please. So then we got to the question of what is a public trail? Is it a trail on public land? Is it a trail that is subject to a public access easement, regardless of ownership? Is it a trail that's just simply used by the public? Is it a trail that's owned by a governmental entity? And there aren't very many definitions of trails in Vermont statute. Forward, please. There is a definition in the Vermont Trail Council statute, and that's a statute that was passed to facilitate outdoor recreation and trail maintenance. It basically says that trail means any land used for hiking, walking, bicycling, cross-country skiing, snowmobiling, all-terrain vehicle riding, horseback riding, and other similar activities for recreation, transportation, or any other compatible uses. Very broad definition. Under that statute, there is a Greenways Council, And they have trail maps that they've designated. There is a link to those trails on the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation website. It includes all sorts of trails. It does not include every trail in the state of Vermont, but it does include trails in New Hampshire as well as Vermont. And I believe there's about 885 trails that are designated under by the Greenways Council. There's also another definition, if you would forward, please, which is in Title 19. And this is a trail that's been designated by a town select board and shows up as being mapped by VTrans at the request of the town select board. It's either a previously designated town highway that the select board has decided that they want to designate as an official trail, or it's a new public right of way that the select board has laid out and mapped for the purpose of recreation. Forward, please. As I said, there's also a definition of a designated corridor, which is in the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife Lands rules. And that talks about a road, trail, path, or other linear travel route at a WMA, riparian land, conservation camp, or fish culture station, which, department lands where we have designated land for trail use. You can forward that as well. So there wasn't a whole lot out there that designated sort of or defined trails or public trails. So I was just trying to give the group a sense of what the current law is around trail definitions. There is a good definition of a class 4 road in Title 19. And that is also a town highway that's been laid out by a select board. It is not maintained. The town is not required to maintain it. Some towns do maintain them to some extent, but they're not required to maintain them. These are also mapped, and the select board is required to send those class 4 town roads to VTrans to map every year. And VTrans has a website that it's really easy to access. You can Google it, town roads, and it just pops up. Forward, please. So as I said, the town isn't required. And here's the link to the VTrans highway map. You can forward again, please. So, not many definitions in statute of what constitutes public land. The Agency of Natural Resources has a rule that talks about primitive camping. And it essentially defines public land as any real property owned or controlled by the state of Vermont. So A&R lands, VTrans lands, BGS, buildings and general services, all of those kinds of lands would apply there. And if you can go forward again, please. There are approximately 101 wildlife management areas that total over 134,000 acres. Most of those were purchased and maintained with Pittman Robertson funds for habitat conservation and life-based recreation, including hunting, fishing, and trapping. And some of them are subject to conservation easements that specifically require the state to maintain those properties for public access for those activities. In addition, Forest Parks and Recreation has about 55 developed state parks, and that totals over 52,000 acres, and state forests that total over 185,000 acres. The reason why we sort of broke those out is that under the state park, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife rules and the Forest Parks and Recreation rules, trapping is allowed by rule. The exception is that in Forest Parks and Recreation land, and if you would go forward again, please. There is one rule that specifically states that hunting is allowed in state parks, in those 55 state parks, but hunting and trapping is prohibited within 500 feet of any state park building. So they're limiting that activity at state park camps and pavilions and things like that. And you can go, thank you. And then the Fish and Wildlife rules specifically authorize trapping and other, wildlife-based recreational activities on our lands under our rules, under our current rules. And if you could forward again, that'd be great. So the other thing that we kind of looked at is we looked at what other states are doing, just to give the group some context. Of the 48 states that allow recreational trapping, 18 have no state level setbacks. I think it's probably, there's some that have two that have general setbacks with no minimum distances. 8 have setbacks that address public roads, highways, and rights of way. And 20 have specific setbacks that include minimum distances. And there's some overlap between some of those state entities. 5 have trail setbacks that vary between 10 and 100 feet. And there are other states, the 20 states that impose minimum distances. Of those, 6 include public outdoor infrastructures, 5 include public trails, 9 include public roads, highways, or road right-of-ways, and 12 include track or track set exceptions. So for example, like a conibear might not be allowed within a certain distance of a trail. And then I specifically kind of looked at a couple of New England states. So one of them was Maine. Trapping is only permitted within a ½ mile of the built-up section of a city or town with the use of trap-type live traps or drowning sets, unless trapping on property owned by the trapper. And then Massachusetts had a very sort of general prohibition against trapping in any public way, cart road, path, or any other commonly used passageway for human beings or domestic animals. And New Hampshire, finally, I think that's the last one. I can't remember from one day to
New York.
next.
You have New York.
New York.
next.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. New Hampshire. Thank you. No person may set or arrange any trap in a public way, cart road, or path commonly. It's very, very similar to Massachusetts. Kind of interesting. And then finally, New York had a 100-foot setback for public trails, except on wildlife management areas. And it also excluded setting traps within culverts and under bridges, et cetera. Drainage ditches. So that's basically what I presented to the group, just to kind of give them a sense of what the background was. The only other thing I would add is that in some of the conversations subsequent conversations that we had, my sort of strong advice would be to fully define a trail if we were going to, initiate a setback and have it be mapped and officially designated and maintained so that it's clear what the trail is and what we're actually talking about, and so that it's also enforceable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. So we had quite a bit of discussion around offsets, roads and trail offsets in meeting, in the working group meeting number 2. We also had a request from working group members to provide some data on non-target catches. And so I and Chris Saunders pulled together what data we had, and actually with the help of Chris Bernier. And the following slides just show, Chris Bernier and I actually pulled together the data from the Trapper Mail Survey, and Chris Saunders pulled together the data from the Warden CAD report. So I'll show you a couple of slides that shows the data from the Trapper Mail Survey, and then I'll turn it over to Chris Saunders.
Hey, Kim, would this
yeah.
be a good breaking point? Because the pizza's arrived.
Sure. Yeah,
That way
I don't
it's
want to
not
hold
cold.
anybody back from their pizza.
Well, I know. So I think this would be, since we're going to move on to another set of data and information, if that.
Sure.
Well, I'd recommend maybe we take whatever we do, Chair, 15
Okay,
minutes.
sounds good. Why don't we take 15, or why don't we come back at 6:15?
Okay. 6:15, Kim. You didn't hear that.
Okay, great.
I'll save you a piece.
Thanks.
Folks, I'm going to stop recording during dinner. That's typically how we handle this, and I will resume recording when we get. Jeez.
Been a lot of that. That's a big lobby segment.
Go ahead.
That topic. I did like this.